So first off, thank you so much for this opportunity to Mark and his team who brought us here today. It's a wonderful opportunity for us, and I can't speak for him, but definitely for myself. I also work, just as kind of a little bit of a bio, I've worked for about 4 years in a community coalition setting doing grant writing and evaluation specialist work. It's been very great. It's been very wonderful. Some of those coalitions are, in fact, incorporated into nonprofit status with the 501c3, and some are not. And as I've found, a lot of people do coalition work, but a lot of people aren't really sure what it is, okay? So today, it's nice to have some of our presentations with these very large-scale nonprofits here, like the Boys and Girls Club, things like that. I'm kind of bringing a little bit more of a micro-organization's perspective, in the sense that we're looking at organizations that might only have anywhere between 10 and maybe 60 people as a whole in terms of their numerical count. So I just wanted to start off by saying that I feel very fortunate that I've been able to not only be a doctoral candidate and go through the 3 years at IUP, which is Indiana University of Pennsylvania, but also do my master's at Lehigh University in applied sociology. My current program is actually housed in the sociology department in collaboration with the economics department. So it's a nice mixture of things right there. So I'm going to get started. I have something in each hand. So let's get going here. Okay, and I'm a walker, so I'll try to go across both things here. Okay, so I want to start with the statement of interest. People usually leave this to the very end, but I kind of want to hit you with what this presentation is actually about up front, so you can keep that in context as we go through the information. So this research argues for the use of impact evaluations in the drug-free communities coalitions in order to answer the current debate regarding whether or not they're effective. Okay, and by effective, when I use the word effective here, because much of this literature is actually grounded in the effectiveness literature, I'm talking about whether or not they're working. Are they actually producing the change with ATOD, meaning alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs, that they say and they strive to do? Now, everything is historically situated. So being a somewhat trained sociologist, I kind of have to give you the context before we move any further. So as we're all very familiar with in this field, policy is reactive. Rarely is it proactive. Now looking at alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs policy, you'll see here that in, if I can get this going here, hold on, there we go. The 1980s to 1990s, the US experienced a very, very large crack cocaine epidemic, with cocaine being shipped in from Miami. Drug dealers were able to see that they could market it, chop it, sell it a lot smaller quantities, and make a lot more money if sold in that form. So they began to do that. The policy response at that time was the war on drugs, which began in 1989. That was the federal policy response. What you then saw in a national survey that gauged youth use and attitudes and perceptions, the federal policy and legislators were very, very scared because they saw that youth rates doubled. Now they're not sure if that was due to lessening community norms around substance use or abuse or increased accessibility that stemmed from the crack cocaine epidemic. Now, with that doubling, in 1997, the Drug-Free Communities Act actually passed. That was the federal policy response. And that actually passed in response to that doubling. Now, what's interesting about this initial act is that it was former President Bill Clinton's most encompassing drug budget to date. Okay, of any of the former presidents. He had the largest budget, and that included prevention, intervention, and treatment. Prevention, one of the largest key components was that Drug-Free Communities Act, and it actually funded community coalitions, which was interesting because the community coalition model had been around since about the 1940s, but was really put into effect by local citizens who were working to solve the cocaine epidemic in the 1980s and 1990s before there was a federal policy response. So they actually mimicked that, put it into policy formation, and as you can see, it's been reauthorized in 2001, 2006, and currently in 2012. There we go. Okay, so a lot of you know this. I wasn't sure exactly the audience, but I just want to go through and provide some basic definitions so we're on the same page as we go through this presentation. As you can see, impact evaluations, they assess changes that are attributed to a particular program or policy. So in this case, we're looking at the Drug-Free Communities Program. And what's nice about these impact evaluations is it allows us to ask questions based on outputs, the intermediary, and also the initial outcomes. So you're asking not only about activities, which our community coalitions are very used to recording. Okay, so for instance, how many people did I serve with this specific program? How many pamphlets did I hand out? Some of you have worked there. I'm sure you're having that struggle with moving them past that outputs phase. I have that same concern as well. But when we start to look at initial outcomes, okay, so what perceptions are changing? And then intermediary, what behavioral outcomes are we seeing? Because with the DFC support program, what it's asking is to create and to stimulate community population level change. So we want to make sure that youth behaviors are in fact changing through the influx of this federal support money into these coalitions. Now, this is an exploratory proposal. Like all proposals, much of the research here today was actually already been conducted. This is in the works. Some colleagues of mine are actually looking for funding right now and hashing out the theory associated with this, the theory of change, and also hashing out the methods. We have some quant, have some qual. I myself am an empowerment evaluator, so I like my appreciative inquiry techniques. So what I'm about to present you is a proposal that's in the making, and so you actually get to experience, as I'm hashing this out, some of the details that we're going through right now. Now, as you can see, with this, everyone would agree that population change indicators are superior forms of measurement. We talked about the random sampling before. We talked about some of the more random experimental designs. Unfortunately, people cannot afford that. Smaller organizations especially, it's very, very challenging to do. The more difficult part of this as well is the literature in 2006. People generally lost interest in this topic. And the reason the interest was lost, especially in academia, was because the funding for these size projects to do impact evaluations was so costly that they couldn't obtain the funds. So if you look at the literature, the changes started to occur, and now most of it focuses on sustainability and also on technical assistance. So that seems to be the pattern that people have gone to. So what we also realize is that it's a very critical component. Being able to measure the actual change is a critical component because people need to be able to vie for grants and continue to make change in their communities. So it was very important that I revisited this literature to see if there were any opportunities out there that had been missed since 2006. Okay. One of the theories that came to mind, there is a community coalition theory. Okay? It's been around for a while. It's fairly popular. One of the shortcomings we found with that was that it was basically grounded in participation models, which is wonderful. But it didn't necessarily provide that theoretical connection between internal coalition functioning and what's actually being changed in the community. So we started looking at some other opportunities. One of those other options that we found was actually in the deviance literature. And considering we're here at the University of Notre Dame, Chicago is not far away, it was kind of ironic, but Shaw and McKay, coming out of the Chicago School in the 1950s, really looked at how communities reproduce the social norms associated with deviant behaviors like teen pregnancy, drugs and alcohol, routine violence. So this has become one of those foundational links that might allow us to tie our internal processes with the external outcomes in a much more affordable way for local groups. So our hypothesis here, the question and the comment that everyone always dreads, I hear hypothesis and I kind of cringe a little bit because it's one of those words that make people nervous. But here, our suggested hypothesis for this specific study would be the stronger the coalition members' perceived functioning, which I'll define all these terms in a minute, the greater the external coalition impact, meaning the actual community level change on specific measures. So when you look at the effectiveness literature, there's generally two indicators that are predominant in the literature. You have the internal coalition function, which measures the degree to which coalition building actions have been implemented and executed. This happens quite a bit, especially in our board's needs assessments and things of that nature when we're looking at whether or not people are satisfied with your initiatives, whether or not they're attending. Those are very generic measures. And so you see here we would use those based on a pre-constructed survey through Penn State University that measures membership satisfaction, membership participation, collaboration, and some other capacities that we're still ironing out that are somewhat present in literature but not as much as some of those other ones. The external coalition functioning, these are the ones that are of much interest. These are the ones that determine the impact. So we're looking at here that population level change. So we would be using the youth reported measures of onset of drug use, past 30-day use, perceptions of risk and harm, and perception of parental disapproval. And I'll talk here about the tools that we're going to use to collect these shortly. Okay, so potential methods. right now we're looking at a heavily quantitative study. If I have it my way, we'll swing a little bit more mixed methods. One of the techniques that I like to use the most, especially when working with community coalitions, is more of an empowerment technique called appreciative inquiry. Okay, is anyone here familiar with appreciative inquiry? Oh, great, that's wonderful. Okay, so the AI approach. A lot of times with evaluation measures, people feel very disconnected from the results themselves. And a lot of your frontline workers do not understand how those results impact their everyday job. And so by using an appreciative inquiry technique, so instead of necessarily going in and saying to them, what impact do you see your organization having? Coming from an appreciative approach, tell me what you like most about your work would be an example of that. Tell me those things that you feel you're strongest at as an organization. So providing a little bit more opportunity for people to give that narrative, okay, that narrative. Tell the story of their experience. Tell the story of their impact. Because we talk a lot today about how quantitative is somewhat of a superior method when it comes to certain questions. These questions here, we can also do very well with some more anecdotal information as well, and maybe even quantify that later on. So that's currently what my colleagues and I are hashing out at the moment. We'll see who wins. I'll be back next year. So anyway, we're going to use two potential sources here. One is the Evaluating Community Coalitions through the Communities That Care survey that's sent out by Penn State University. That's been a pretty reputable survey. It's been going on now for almost 10 years. So we have a little bit of data there. We would be starting with a snapshot, starting with year one, and then could potentially do longitudinal data with these studies, but that would be the primary measurement of our internal coalition functioning. Our Pennsylvania Area Youth Survey, which almost every state has, measures the alcohol, tobacco, and other drug behaviors amongst youth. They take it in schools in grades 6, 8, 10th, and 12 every 2 years. So it allows us to follow some cohort models, which will be very helpful to us as well. So important considerations, I'm going to wrap it up here because I know we have someone else to go, but some important considerations here. So if, in fact, we do this work, I always like to know what is it going to contribute. What it's going to contribute is it could positively impact the outlying perception that coalition and nonprofit organizations haphazardly operate relative to their for-profit counterparts. There seems to be a division in a lot of the literature between for-profit and not-for-profit, and also in some of the dialogue that people have even at the conference level. So really adding some of that structure and input into that could really enhance that relationship. That's what we're hoping. Furthermore, providing strong funding arguments. If people can't prove their impact, especially at that community level, they can't argue for funding, okay, in a way that allows them to up to bid with a lot more larger, more human resource organizations that can provide those technical specialties like evaluation. Okay, I think that's about it, and I think you wanted to do questions one at a time. Is that what you want to do? Okay, so does anyone have any specific questions related to that work? Anything? You're good? Okay, go ahead. Would you like the microphone? Is this? Oh, that one's working? Okay.
Thank you. I'm Jay Malone, History Science Society. Working with your cohort, recidivism is extraordinarily high. So are there special measures that you put in place for this, working with these types of groups?
I think that depends on, with this specifically looking at ATOD, that's not one of the risk factors that we're assessing, but that could be a very logical one if the question was expanded. Definitely, definitely. Any more? Okay, thank you.